Welcome to Quick Compare, the show where we take a multi-platform game, choose two versions, and try to decide which one is better. And today, we are looking at the critically slammed Army Men Sarges Heroes for Dreamcast and PlayStation. Seriously though, this game was slammed by critics, and I just genuinely don't understand it. Like, I loved this game growing up. I still love playing this game despite some limitations. Now, originally today's episode was going to feature a comparison of the Dreamcast version versus N64, but considering that they are basically identical outside of a couple of added things in the Dreamcast version, I decided why not mix it up a bit and look at a version of the game that is vastly different. I think it is much more interesting, and I'm hoping you will all agree with me as we dig in. Now, the N64 version of Army Men Sarges Heroes came out in September of 1999 and was followed 5 months later by the PlayStation 1 release in February of 2000. It was handled internally by 3DO. I couldn't find anything to the contrary or to confirm that, so if anyone knows, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to figure that out for sure definitively. Now, the Dreamcast version of the game followed 8 months after the PlayStation 1 version, so a good full year after the original N64 launch, and was developed by Sapphire and published by Midway. Now, overall, I don't think the Dreamcast version of the game really takes advantage of the Dreamcast console. It honestly looks like it has a lot of the same limitations as the base N64 game. There is one really interesting feature missing from the Dreamcast game, however, and that is the Letterbox display mode that was featured on the N64 release. This mode is really awesome on the N64 because you can actually scale it with modern displays to kind of make a pseudo widescreen game out of it that the other two versions of the game just don't offer. Oh well. Let's dive into this comparison of Dreamcast and PlayStation, shall we? Now, starting with the main menu, the Dreamcast version utilizes the same menu structure as the N64 version of the game, so you have to press right and left on players and modes to select different options. It's a little confusing because there's no actual on-screen prompt telling you to do so, so you kind of just had to figure it out. Now, the PS1 menu is completely redone and is a lot more traditional. All the modes are featured right here. There's no guessing what's gotta happen. If you want to play 2 players, you go down to multiplayer. You want to play boot camp, you just select boot camp. Campaign, campaign. Very straightforward. Next, we have the Movies tab on the PlayStation 1 version, and this is for all of the pre-rendered cutscenes the PS1 version of the game has added in. You can click on this tab and literally watch any movie in the game. It doesn't matter if you've beaten the level up to that point or not. You can literally watch the entire game's storyline without having played it. The PlayStation 1 version of the game also has a level select function, so if you click on campaign, you can choose any level that you have unlocked. Over on the Dreamcast, to choose a specific level to play, you have to enter a password, which makes replaying specific levels a lot harder to do without having them written down or looking them up constantly. Now, both versions of the game do feature an autosave function, which is really nice and handy. Another really cool addition of the PS1 version of the game in the options menu are added character bios and a demo for Army Men Air Attack, which was really cool at the time. Moving on to gameplay modes, the games are virtually identical as far as modes go. They both feature boot camp, campaign, and multiplayer. Now, the multiplayer option is limited to just 2 players on the PlayStation 1 version of the game, unfortunately, compared to the 4 players of the Dreamcast version. Now, the core story of the game is the same between both versions, but the added cutscenes in the PS1 version really give the story so much more depth. Now, when the game was brought to the Dreamcast from the N64, voice work was added in, so at least you don't have to read everything like you did on the N64 original, but it's just nowhere near as in-depth as the PlayStation versions is, and it is all done with in-game cutscenes rather than the pre-rendered cutscenes. Now, both versions of the game play vastly different. While the basic level design tries to be the same between both games, the way things are laid out is completely different. Enemy and weapon placements are completely different between games. In one version, you might find a rocket launcher at a specific location, while it won't be there at all in the other. The base difficulty on the PlayStation 1 version is also higher. It is basically equivalent to the Dreamcast's Expert mode. Enemies take 3 shots to kill instead of 2, and you just take more damage and can die a lot quicker, in my experience. The PlayStation 1 version of the game also doesn't feature any building interiors, so right off the bat, the game is different from where you even start. On the Dreamcast version, you start in the barracks. On the PlayStation version, you're outside the barracks. There's also later levels that feature interior aspects of buildings that you go into on the Dreamcast version that are just completely absent on the PlayStation version. The PlayStation 1 version of the game also sadly features a lot more glitches than the Dreamcast version in my experience. There's a lot of collision problems with the PlayStation 1 version. There'll be times where you just disappear behind something that you're standing in front of. You'll float sometimes. And then if you get too close to a wall, you'll actually kind of like speed up your movement speed as you're clipping against it. It just kind of throws you around. It's really interesting. One problem both versions of the game do both still suffer from is the fact that you really can't shoot anybody if you're too close to them. If you get right up in someone's business, you will never hit them and you will just get wrecked. Now moving on to load times, the Dreamcast version and PlayStation versions of Army Men Sarge's Heroes both feature load times because they are disc-based games. Now the Dreamcast version loads vastly quicker than the PlayStation version. Moving on to the graphical aspects of Army Men Sarge's Heroes between PlayStation and Dreamcast, things are a little more interesting than you'd really expect on the surface. So the Dreamcast version runs at 480i. It does not utilize VGA output, sadly, unless you have a modded ISO, but for the sake of my comparisons, I do not. I do stock comparisons. But anyway, Dreamcast 480i, PlayStation 1 runs at 240p. But let's go ahead and start with the PlayStation version because this is the one I find a lot more fascinating. Everything has been basically redesigned, so textures have been redone, the terrain has been redone, and the character models have been redone. And honestly, I kind of dig the way this version of the game looks. I love the ground textures, I love the way things look, but the game is plagued by really pervasive distance fog and texture warping. It is so bad and noticeable when you get up to a building. Like, look at this. It's, oh man, that's like, it's bad. It's really bad. It doesn't look good. Now over on the Dreamcast, a lot of these problems have been fixed. There's no distance fog, character models are really clear, sharp, great animations, but I'm not the biggest fan of the textures. This game was originally on N64, this version is ported from N64, but it feels like it keeps that texture limitation despite them being better than what was found on the N64. The game really does not take advantage of the Dreamcast hardware. I honestly would have loved to see the PlayStation 1 version of these textures up-resed into the Dreamcast version. I think the game would have looked a lot better aesthetically. But hey, at least the game looks good, runs pretty well. There are a few noticeable frame drops in certain levels, but overall, it's really solid. And Sarge just looks really good. Yeah. Now, music and audio is a really mixed bag for both versions of the game. It's fascinating, really. They both have CD quality audio, so music and sound effects and voice work is a lot better than what was found on the N64, obviously, but both versions of the game use different audio. Now, they retain the same voice actors for characters between each version, so Sarge sounds the same on both of them, Colonel Grimm sounds the same, Vicky, everybody. But sound effects for weapons, if you get hit, there's even different music in the PS1 version for specific parts of the game that aren't present in the Dreamcast version at all. I like certain weapons on the PlayStation 1 version more, and I like certain weapons on Dreamcast version more. It's really interesting. But for every good sound effect, there's just ones that aren't as great. Now let's talk about controls for a minute, because this is another fascinating point of comparison, because both versions have strengths and weaknesses once again. Over on PlayStation 1, you have dedicated strafe buttons assigned to R1 and L1, which is really great, makes strafing really easy. But turning on PlayStation 1 is actually pretty difficult. You can be going in a straight line, and when you try to turn, it just feels clunky. Over on the Dreamcast version, turning is implemented a lot better, but strafe is assigned to a button you hold, and then your thumbstick is then mapped to strafe instead of turning. So it takes some getting used to, but after you get used to it, it feels a lot better than the PlayStation version in my mind, but it does have that startup learning curve to get used to it. But let's go ahead and dig into price here, because there is a vast price difference between the PS1 version of Army Men Sarge's Heroes and the Dreamcast version. So starting with the PlayStation 1 version, a copy can be found for anywhere between $7 to $15. Over on the Dreamcast, things are looking a lot more pricey, going from $13 to $50 depending on condition and completeness. But the time has come for us to decide our winner, and I am going to have to go with Dreamcast just because of the better controls, presentation, and less glitches. There are things I wish that the Dreamcast had implemented from the PlayStation 1 version as well as the N64 version, but until someone goes in and makes a definitive version of the game that combines all of these best elements from each version of the game, the Dreamcast is about as good as it gets at the moment. Anyway, The PlayStation 1 version, while interesting in its own right, I feel just had too many things against it to wholeheartedly recommend it. If it's the only version you can get, it's actually still a really great game to play if you can get past a few glitches and figure out how things work. Once you figure that out, it can be enjoyable, but it can be exceptionally frustrating. I'm gonna warn you, it really can be frustrating. But that covers it for this week's comparison. What did you guys think? Which version do you like more? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you have any compare requests you'd like to see, be sure to leave those in the comments below as well. And I appreciate you so much for making it through today's comparison. Thank you for watching any videos on my channel. Honestly, you help me grow daily, so I can't thank you enough for that. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and that like-dislike button, just depending how much you like today's video. If you'd like to further help support the channel, you can always click that join button here on YouTube, or check out my Patreon by looking in the description below. As always, I am just grateful for your consideration and help. Now, go and enjoy this side-by-side of Army Sarge's Heroes running on Sega Dreamcast and PlayStation 1.
Wakey, wakey, you buffoons. Time for a high-caliber breakfast in bed. Oh, I do so love the smell of burnt plastic in the morning.
What's going on?
Your mission is to get to the landing pad for evac. Pronto.
Go. Good to go. Go. Good to go. Colonel, are you all right?
I took a bullet crossing the bridge and Bravo got separated during the attack.
They can hold their own. Now let's get you to the landing pad.
Yeah? We'll see about that.
Good to go.
Well done, Sarge. Well done. Sarge, thanks for the rescue.
My pleasure, Colonel. I only hope the Bravo Company commandos made it out okay.
Colonel, we got a blue tank parked in the town below.
Spies, no doubt. Pilot, take us down for a look.
Colonel, you need a medic.
What I need is to defeat the Tan Army. Well, spy, no doubt. Apprehend him and bring him in for interrogation. Sarge, locate the blue spy. When you find him, capture him, then return to the landing pad for evac.
Party time.
time.
Good to go. Good to go.
I've got a bad feeling about this. What the? I don't think we're in Kansas anymore.
Good to go.
Party time. Go.
Good to go. Good to go.